Hi everyone. For this video, I would like to do an overview, an aftermath review of my experience at the Origins Game Fair this year. Uh, During the course of the convention, which stretched four, um, I'll say four days and a couple hours, because technically it goes from Wednesday to Sunday, but on Wednesday I didn't get there until mid-afternoon, and really on Sunday, things start to close down a couple hours early. So basically, you've got Thursday, Friday, and Saturday full days, Sunday most of the day, and at least for me, Wednesday just the tail end. A couple hours. During that period, I was able to play in 5 different full games of Axis and Allies, 3 different versions: Anniversary, 1942 Second Edition, and 1914. And if you count the brief stint Wednesday night that I played in Global 1942, you might say that I completed 5 games and played in 6. Though I don't know that the 1942 one, or the Global 1942, should really count, because I was only sitting there playing / observing for about an hour. It was kind of a tutorial game, and I literally took one turn as one country during that period. But technically, I did play in that one. Don't really have a whole lot of thoughts. Was just trying to soak in everything that was going on, and I was mostly focused on just my one country in my one small area of the world. I was a minor power. I was just looking at Italy because no one had signed up for it yet, and there's not as much going on, and so I thought that would be a good starting point. So moving on, we'll go ahead and start with 1942 Second Edition. Then we will talk about Anniversary Edition, which I don't have a board for, so I'll be using the 1942 Second Edition map as kind of a proxy, and as I talk about different things, I'll make mention about how Anniversary is different than what we have, going on in front of us. Then I'll pick up this map, and we'll talk about 1914, which I have below. Alright, so 1942. I made a previous video about some rebalancing changes that are being made, that were implemented. When I got there, for some reason I was thinking that the extra destroyer for UK was supposed to be here. Either I was mistaken about that, or Greg Smorey made a change, and it starts up there now. But all the other changes are exactly what I remember reading in Larry Harris's forum during that discussion. And all in all, I will say that it does seem fairly well balanced. A number of people were seeing these revisions for the first time at the tournament, and no one really seemed too taken aback. The general consensus was this moved it in the right direction. I did talk to one person who felt like it was closer to balanced, but still not quite there yet. Axis slight advantage. I tend to lean on the other side. I feel like the Allies have a slight advantage. To me, the ideal mixture would be all of the revisions, except either the German bomber, which got moved here, gets moved back here, or all of the revisions, which means the bomber stays here, and the Germans get their sub back up there. To me, that would be the ideal revision. But overall, the changes did seem to go over well. It was not, in my experience, in my game that I played, things were not grossly imbalanced. But I do feel like the Allies had a slight advantage. Now, a few other things that I do want to mention, and this is more kind of in general for tournament play, especially for 42 Second Edition and Anniversary, is that these games are played on a timer. You have to do that when you only have a couple days and you need to get a series of games in for each version to get these tournaments completed. So you can quickly move from one to the next, and people know if they aren't in this match that's going on right now, when should they come back. They can't keep checking in every couple hours to see how this game is going. So while you might finish a game, there is much greater focus on victory cities, because most of the time you aren't going to have a clear winner where one side has taken the capitals. But you're going to be running against the clock. The time is going to be over, and you're going to need to pick a winner. And that is determined by the victory cities in this game. And so you might make certain moves. I don't think that impacts strategy. You're not going to do something totally radical that you wouldn't do in a regular game. But when you think about, what areas are important to take, let's say that... we'll just look over here. We've got the Philippines, or Manila, is a victory city, and Honolulu, Hawaii, is a victory city. So, in a game, excuse me, in a game where Germany, or the U.S. is probably not going to focus entirely on a kill Germany first strategy. If they do, they need to make sure they take out Germany quick, grab up these victory cities, because Japan... the Philippines are never going to be taken, and Japan is probably going to come over here, grab Hawaii, and they're probably going to grab Calcutta over here in India as well. So the Allies are essentially giving up a victory city over here if they essentially ignore Japan or put very limited resources over here. And that's something that you can do if you are in a take both capitals games, which is how my friends and I normally play, because you just make sure that, Japan can't start pressing in over here, and then you're fine. They can have Hawaii, is worth one production, who cares? You're, taking out Germany, you're landing in France, that sort of thing. But in a tournament game, where even if you're making headway over here, let's say you land in France, but Germany has, Italy, and it's maybe the last turn, but Germany has Berlin, Rome, it's taken out Russia, Japan has Calcutta, it has, let's see, it has Shanghai, it has the Philippines, it has Hawaii. It probably isn't going to matter. I've not done the math to see what else you would need. Maybe if you took Karelia, that might be, it might be balanced, but I think you're still probably going to be behind by one. I haven't done, like I said, I haven't done the math on it, but this almost forces the U.S. to devote at least moderate resources over in the Pacific. Otherwise, you're automatically down. Or you're racing to try and not just take a victory city over here, let's say Paris, to, gain the lead. You have to take it just to break even. So that's, your strategy is going to be a little bit different. That is going to come into play. You don't have infinite time. You can't just say, well, we're going to take out Germany, because once we take out Germany, we'll dump everything over here and we'll easily take Hawaii back, because you're probably not going to have enough time to do that all in one game. Now, for switching to Anniversary Edition, the map, of course, looks largely like this. I do want to focus on China, because there was an interesting strategy that I saw over there for China during the tournament. So China has more territories than this. It's more like China in global. I don't think it has quite as many territories as in global, but it's a lot more than this. And depending on how many territories China has that are uncontrolled by the Axis, that determines how many bonus infantry that they get. And so in that game, there are two victory cities over here. Shanghai, like in this game, as well as Hong Kong is a victory city. And Chinese forces are not able to, they're able to move into any territory along here, any Chinese territory, Manchuria as well, but they cannot move into Indochina or Burma, and all their territories are worth one. They have infantry and they have one American fighter. And so what I saw someone doing, in fact, the championship game, the person playing the Axis powers did this. They basically ignored China. Anytime that China would move into one of the victory cities in force, Japan would use its fighters as coastal bombardment, maybe drop off 2 infantry, minimal forces, just enough so that if China, hit extremely or rolled extremely well, that Japan wouldn't have to lose any fighters, and that was it. That was all they devoted to it because they have all that extra force coming in over here. Then they dumped units down here because China can't come in and use that to push over, take India, take Calcutta. And as I described in earlier in this video, the U.S., especially in Anniversary Edition, I feel pretty much has to devote resources over here heavily. Go for Japan first, because not only does it have these 2 victory cities, and really that one as well, like in 1942 second edition, there's also Hong Kong. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 victory cities all tied up in the Pacific. You can't afford that. The Axis are just going to get, plus whatever Germany has over there and anything it's taken from Russia. That's pretty much like giving them the game. So Japan, especially, they're going to have Calcutta as well. So the Allies can't really afford to not threaten these things. So Japan is going to come in here, mostly ignore this, just taking pot shots where it makes sense. I do still recommend, I need to look at the starting placement again, but I do still recommend, if it's possible, devoting resources to taking out the fighter that's over in China, because that's really their only offensive unit. If they don't have that, they're just throwing infantry into attacks, and so if you're able to take out that fighter, that's going to help you tremendously over here. So I would still recommend taking that out, but aside from that, you're just going to be looking at how many territories China has. You take the number of territories they control divided by 2 and round down, and that's how many infantry they get. So just keep an eye on that, and always make sure they have an odd number whenever possible, and so they get 1 less infantry and take out that fighter, and otherwise I think you're good. And then, let's see, yeah, we talked about how you can pretty much ignore them and then just move this way. The U.S. is probably going to be building up. If they don't, for some reason, all of the victory cities over here are in your hands as Japan, and you're going to get Calcutta. Just come over here and take Hawaii. And that is really all you need to do over here. As long as the U.S. doesn't start to build up, you just want to make sure that you hang on to Hawaii and they can't threaten these other things. The rest of your production can start heading up that way and down that way as well. Moving across the board to over here to Germany, a strategy that I also saw in the championship game that I really like is that Germany built a carrier on the first turn and plopped it down, of course, right here, which made it very difficult. In fact, I was a little bit concerned Sea Lion might be coming, and so I ended up being behind a turn building the British Navy. I was the Allies in this game. Behind a turn building the British Navy because of that, and the game ended. The front with Russia kept going back and forth and back and forth, and eventually Russia did fall in that game. But if England had been, 1 turn ahead of where it was, that probably would have completely changed the balance on the Eastern Front, and that Germany would not have been able to make the assault on Moscow. And if it hadn't made it then, it had to push its forces heavily forward. Its navy that had built up here, that carrier, had been destroyed along with its fighters. The British Navy was sitting here in force, had more transports coming in, if Germany hadn't been able to make its move when it did, England was in a position to start pouring units in here, starting basically the turn. As soon as Germany took its turn, England was going to start dumping guys in here. Probably would have been able to take Karelia, which would have cut off the German supply, and that would have completely changed the dynamic over here. So if England had been in the in that one turn ahead, that probably would have changed that entire dynamic. And Japan over here was completely pinned down versus the Americans. We were kind of having a naval standoff with the Japanese Navy. I believe they were moving back and forth here. I can't remember where they actually ended up at the end of the game. And then the American Navy was around in this area, making sure that I was able to threaten, actually I think like right here. Yeah, right here. Making sure that at minimum I was able to threaten at least one victory city, threaten extra production, or potentially threaten Japan itself. So Japan was kind of pinned down. It had a couple units over here. I think it had like a tank and infantry and an artillery was the sum of the units that it had down here. And it had maybe like an infantry up here. And because of the situation in China, this border from Russia was in no way threatened by them. So they had minimal forces in here. It's just that the Allies didn't have the forces to pull away from Russia to deal with them right then. But as soon as the German front was secured, they'd easily be able to mop that up. And Germany itself had not a whole lot left, actually. Its forces along the front had been heavily expended. It did still have a handful of tanks and a handful of infantry, but nowhere near the forces that that Russia and England combined would be able to field within the next turn or two. Something else that I was doing that I found very effective as the Allies is I strategically bombed Italy pretty much every turn. Italy gets 10 production per turn, assuming it doesn't go up or down based on territories, and that tended to work pretty well. By their first turn, they were able to easily repair it and still build. I think they built 2 units, but then the third, because I'm sorry, that was the second turn. The first turn I didn't damage it enough. I don't recall. But anyway, I was strategically bombing Italy pretty much every turn, and they essentially were able to build maybe 1 unit a turn, and that was it. They had units that they had marched forward here, pretty much units that they started with or purchased on the first turn, and that was pretty much it. They did still have their navy, so they got their coastal bombardment, which was kind of annoying, but that was pretty much all they were able to do. So I was pleased with how things went with Italy. I feel that if I'd gotten England in the war a turn earlier, I probably could have kept Russia from falling. And I think that over here, U.S. focusing on Japan is the right way to go. Japan doing the thing in China that I talked about and swooping down here is the way for them to go. And as Germany, they're always the most complicated country, but I do like putting the carrier there on the first turn and just watching as England builds up, and then maybe just devoting small resources to it just to keep this protected. And especially in a tournament game, because Leningrad is a victory city, if you can prevent England from doing a landing here. Yes, they could come all the way around here to do it, but now their transports are 2 spaces away. It's going to take them a turn to come back. They're going to be limited to dropping off in these 2 territories, and if you wanted to, if they move up there, you could move over here. If you feel like you are stronger based on the composition of your fleet, a carrier and 2 fighters defends much better than it attacks. If you feel like you could move here and cause them a major headache, if they move their fleet away, then that is something that's open to Germany to do. Now this video is already a bit long. I didn't realize that I'd be spending that much time on those two games. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this one here in a second, and then I'll make a second video about 1914 because I do have some thoughts about that. There was a rule discrepancy which I feel dramatically changes strategy, and so I have a number of thoughts on that. And the rules are officially stated in such a way that it allows for this movement, but I know that when I learned the game last year, Origins, I was told something different, and being a new player, I never actually looked it up. So we're going to be talking about those things and how it changes the strategy and how it changes the game, and what that means for balancing, and what my preference is and why. But I'm going to go ahead and cut this one off. I'll get this one posted and then go ahead and get the next one started. Have a good day, everybody.